special qualities. Let's find them. And so there have been hundreds of articles written trying to explain what's so great about the Mona Lisa, but consider the possibility that there's nothing unusual about it aside from the fact that it was stolen. There are lots of good paintings out there that no one's ever heard of, and that would have been one of them in all likelihood.
Absolutely. I was in that same gallery, and you had to fight through a crowd to get up to the velvet ropes, and of course there's two guards standing there, and it's behind glass because at some point someone tried to damage it, and you're about 10 feet away from this thing, and it is approximately the size of a sheet of paper, if I recall correctly, maybe a little bit bigger.
Yep.
It's not large, and you can get a better view in any good art book than what you can do in person. And like you said, it's a delightful piece of work, but there's so many others, and you get a similar thing. We were in Italy, and people go to see the David, the statue of David, and definitely, actually, probably one of the best pieces of sculpture. But we were also in Bologna, and there was 4 statues by Michelangelo, and no one was there to see those.
Yes,
and they were also amazing. Something I can't even fathom how an artist can look at a piece of stone and say, "I see a person inside of there. I've just got to dig them out." That to me is kind of like magic.
Right. And the point isn't that the David is a bad sculpture. Or even worse than any of the others, or that the Mona Lisa isn't a good painting. Of course it's a good painting. Of course Leonardo was a talented artist. Of course he worked very hard. But those qualities aren't enough. It usually takes a little bit of luck along the way to cause something to really break out in a big way.
Absolutely. And if you don't mind, I want to go back to luck and the conversation of how people don't want to accept themselves as lucky. And you mentioned in the book one of my most favorite quotes ever from Elizabeth Warren. And if you don't mind, I pulled the audio clip off of YouTube, and I'd like to play it, and we can talk about it. Is that all right with you?
Right. Sure.
Hang on 1 second here.
There is nobody in this country who got rich on his own. Nobody. You built a factory out there, good for you. But I want to be clear. You moved your goods to market on the roads the rest of us paid for. Yep. You hired workers the rest of us paid to educate. You were safe in your factory because of police forces and fire forces that the rest of us paid for. You didn't have to worry that marauding bands would come and seize everything at your factory and hire someone to protect against this because of the work the rest of us did. Now look, you built a factory and it turned into something terrific or a great idea. God bless. Keep a big hunk of it. But part of the underlying social contract is you take a hunk of that and pay forward for the next kid who comes along.
And so that to me is kind of the for some conservatives, for a larger portion of libertarians, they happen to be successful, they do well, and they get this attitude. And pardon my language, I've got mine, fuck you. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it was interesting. That speech quickly became known as the "you didn't build that" speech.
Right.
Barack Obama gave a similar speech. They were remarkably similar speeches, the two of them. And he made the same points. Look, of course you were hardworking. Of course you deserve credit for the success that you've earned. But just remember, it was a community effort too, and part of the social contract is, as Warren said, is that you pay forward for the next people who come along. And that's completely uncontroversial if you would look at the text of it. Obama, unfortunately, also had a "you didn't build that" statement explicitly in his speech. And so one of the Romney ads during the campaign was to show business owners that remark taken out of context. And, of course, they reacted angrily to it. And the internet was just ablaze with angry commentary about those speeches. But the substance, the point of those speeches is beyond reproach. No one could disagree with the claim that there were infrastructure investments without which you never would have succeeded. So, of course, you have a responsibility to help maintain those investments.
Now, we were talking pre-show that apparently you were being interviewed by Julia Galef.
Yes, just recently spoke with her.
Excellent. And I guess the topic came up of, and this is one of the points that I had, and you talked about it in your book, and I've seen this in people. Is it socially better or financially better, or is it adaptive in a weird kind of way for you to ignore that you're lucky and just to think that your success is because of you? Does that actually end up helping you if you're ignorant of other people helping you out?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, so many people are so adamant that luck has nothing to do with it. Why do they acquire and cling so tenaciously to that belief in the first place? I think there are perhaps ways in which it's adaptive to think in those terms. One thing we know about humans and non-human animals, for that matter, is that we're not very good at assigning proper decision weight to things that occur in the distant future on one dimension, or that occur with uncertainty on another. If something's immediate and certain, that has an overwhelming lure to us in comparison with even bigger rewards that might be delayed in time or not sure to come to us. And so it's hard to invest for the future because of that. You know, you got to incur the costs of the investment now. The gains, they'll come, but they may not come. And if they do come, they'll come with delay. So if somebody were steeped growing up with the teaching that, look, you can work hard and do everything according to the rules, and you still might not succeed, you won't get lucky, and that's going to sink your ship, it might be harder for people to summon the wherewithal to undertake the efforts that you need to become an expert. That's hard to become an expert in something. It takes thousands of hours of difficult practice. And so maybe telling kids, look, it's all up to you. If you work hard, you will succeed. That's a belief that is false, but it's possible at least that if you believe that, you might be a little bit better than the next kid at summoning the effort you need in order to have a chance to succeed.
Well, I know in my working career, I have run into some people who own businesses or managers that have this wildly, inappropriately optimistic view of themselves and their skill set. And they cannot recognize failure. They cannot recognize when they make mistakes. And no matter how bad things are, they always say they're awesome and everything is going great. And sometimes the result of that is that they pull themselves out. That somehow
that's exactly the point.
Yeah,
if you were a realist, you might not have ever launched that business in the first place.
and they pull themselves through, and it ends up being okay, and they survive. And that just builds the narrative because we revise our own memories of how awesome I was.
And those are the ones we see. The ones who failed drop from view.
You're psychic. You're reading my mind here, because the ones that are wildly over-optimistic and keep plodding along despite the evidence saying that everything is going to implode, they fail miserably. And it just explodes and implodes, and they disappear, and we never hear from them.
Yep. Anyway, whether or not it's adaptive, I don't think that's a real sticking point. I'm not insisting that it's better to believe that luck doesn't matter when you're young. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But it's interesting that it might be. But once you have succeeded, then I think we're just missing an opportunity, because if you look back on whatever success you've achieved, well, you have two options, at least. One is the common one. I did it all myself, and then just stomp your feet and insist on keeping every nickel that came your way. Or you could look back more reflectively and say, yeah, I worked hard, but I also had a break or two along the way, and I'm grateful to have done so well, and I take it as my responsibility to help pay forward so others will have a chance to do well.
And if I can, to wrap up this segment, of course, jump in and throw in whatever I may have cut you off. How do people on the outside perceive someone that tells their story and claims it's all skill versus someone who acknowledges a whole lot of luck?
It's a night and day difference in how others react to those two self-presentations. You know, if you say you did it all yourself, people don't like people like that. If you say, yeah, I worked hard, but I really enjoyed some good breaks along the way, that's a mark of humility. People are much more eager to have a drink with you or talk with you. They'd be much more likely to think they could become friends with you. They'd be much more likely to want you as a member of their team. And so the people who are afraid to admit that they were lucky, they seem to want to protect their position, or that maybe they're worried people will think less of them if they admit they were lucky. No, the evidence is very clear that's not the way people react.
Excellent. So what I want to do is take a quick commercial break, and we'll come back and we'll talk about a second big theme of your book, and that is income and taxes and all that stuff. And I don't want to spoil it for everybody, but we're going to take a commercial break, and I'm going to give you a little test, and the listeners too, and you get to cheat, Robert, because you know this test. I'm going to give you 3 words: hat, shoe, pin. And I want everybody to hang on to those, and after a couple minutes of commercials, come back and see if all the listeners can pass this test like I know you will. So hang on, everybody. We're going to do commercial. We'll be right back.
Here's an excerpt from The God Virus by Darrell W. Ray.
Every day, religion affects us in ways we may not realize. It makes your Uncle Ned spend hours praying for you. Gives your Baptist neighbor a reason to reject her own child who married a Catholic. It teaches your Pentecostal sister to spank her children to keep them from going to hell. It requires a Catholic priest to deny his sex drive. It causes people to give enormous amounts of money to religious organizations, and causes you to avoid talking to your cousin Jenny for fear she may try to convert you to Jehovah's Witnesses. Religion has both obvious and subtle influences on you and on society. This book explores the impact of religion on you and your world. It draws open the curtain of mystery and offers ways to understand and make informed decisions about religion. Have you ever wondered what makes religion so powerful? What makes people profess deep faith even as they act in ways that betray that faith? What makes people blind to the irrationalities of their own religion, yet see clearly the problems of other religions? How does it weave its way into our political system? If these and similar questions interest you, this book will help you understand its power in you, your family, and your culture.
The God Virus by Darrell W. Ray is available at atheistaudiobooks.com.
All right, everybody, welcome back. You are still listening to the cleverly titled Phil Ferguson Show, and with me I have Robert H. Frank. And before we left, I gave him a little trick quiz, and we're going to see if the listeners can remember. I gave him 3 words. Listeners, make a note, write it down, say it out loud. And Robert, how did you do? Do you remember the 3 words I gave you?
Oh, I do, yes. In fact, I'll never forget them. Hat, shoe, pen.
Excellent.
But it's not easy to do that, as maybe some of the listeners will have discovered.
Well, it was curious because my mom is now 80 years old, and recently I took her to a doctor, and they gave her 3 random words, and I think it was like tree, ball, bicycle, or something like that, and said, remember those. And then 5 minutes later they asked, and you had talked about that in your story because you actually had an accident that might have impaired your memory. You mind sharing a little bit about that?
Sure. It was November 2007, so 7 or 8 years ago. I was playing tennis with a friend. Early in the second set, he said I complained of feeling nauseated. I was, the next thing he knew, lying motionless on the tennis court. He knelt to investigate. I had no breath, no pulse. I was dead. Basically, I had suffered sudden cardiac death is one of the terms for it. Your heart stops beating and you die. And he yelled out for somebody to call 911. He flipped me onto my back and started pounding on my chest. Fortunately, he was able to get a cough out of me after some minutes, and an ambulance crew arrived very quickly and transported me to a hospital. I was flown to a larger one in Pennsylvania, put on ice overnight, and basically for for 4 days after the event, I was completely incompetent mentally. My family says I was talking gibberish from my hospital bed. And one of the tests they give you, as you point out, is to